Good evening and welcome. I'm Pam Berman. I'm the president of the Massachusetts Women's Political Caucus. Thank you for joining us at our 31st annual meeting. This year's meeting has taken on a new format, as this is the first time we have ever hosted it virtually. We invite you to engage with us via Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We are incredibly excited about our keynote speaker, Latasha Brown, who will be joining us shortly. We're first going to conduct some business and then we will get to Latasha. This year has had no shortage of surprises, yet despite them, we've had a lot of success. As we celebrate the beginning of a new year for the Massachusetts Women's Political Caucus and the members that keep our caucus running smoothly, they are examples of what leadership truly is. They make things happen, but more importantly, they make things happen for other women. I would like to acknowledge the invaluable contributions of our Mass Women's Political Caucus Board, as well as the PAC board members. Together with our past board members and president, your work supporting our mission to increase the number of women elected and appointed to public office is the foundation of our success and the foundation of our organization. Your contributions make us shine and help us support women leaders in our community. Thank you for your time, your passion, and your generosity. Our board members serve on a voluntary basis, helping us guide the caucus toward greater success every year, and this year has been another extraordinary one. Thank you to each of you for your devotion to the cause, your hard work and partnership, which enabled us to elect more women to public office in every corner of the state, from the Berkshires to North Shore to Central Massachusetts, Cape Cod, the Islands, the Merrimack Valley, and of course, Boston. I also want to thank and acknowledge the MWPC young professionals and our incredible interns who provide our candidates with campaign support. Thank you also to each of you for participating tonight. I want to acknowledge and thank our elected officials who are with us tonight. State Auditor General Suzanne Bump, who is a longtime supporter of the caucus. The same with State Representative Tricia Farley-Bouvier, Mayor Yvonne Spicer of Framingham, Mayor Cassandra Gove of Amesbury, Everett City Councilor Stephanie Martins, Wakefield City Councilor Mayreen Butts, Beverly City Councilor Stacey Ames, Pittsfield City Councilor Helen Moon. Despite this year's challenges, we marked major milestones. We held our annual legislative breakfast with Senate President Karen Spilka and Speaker Pro Tem Pat Haddad. A special thank you to board member Mary Yusevich for your work on this. We marked the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment's passage with a conversation among North Shore activists and political leaders about creating a more equitable future. In partnership with the League of Women Voters, we hosted a congressional debate in the 6th District's congressional Democratic primary. We celebrated a record election of women of color with a conversation with Mayor Yvonne Spicer, Boston City Councilor Lydia Edwards, and Pittsfield City Councilor Helen Moon. We had a conversation on the pros and cons of ranked choice voting. A special thank you to board member Charlotte Golo-Ritchie for her work on this. We had a great session with author Rosemarie Day and NPR's Tiziana Deering on Marching Toward Healthcare, Rosemarie Day's book. We with the Women's Bar Association had an interesting panel on changing perspectives of motherhood in the workplace. With our gold sponsor, Blue Cross Blue Shield, we had a terrific commentary with Cindy Friedman and look forward to more next year. I would like to thank our event co-sponsors, the League of Women Voters, the Women's Bar Association, and of course, our longtime gold sponsor, Blue Cross Blue Shield. I would like to thank our leading thinkers, activists, candidates, and elected officials who participated in these online discussions. It is an amazing group of people who are listed on your slide. The annual meeting is also a time to announce the changes in leadership as our term comes to an end. Before I do, I want to give a special thank you to our officers who have served this past year: Vice President Susan Coakley, Treasurer Dolores Pettis, and Secretary Don Shand. Also, a huge note of appreciation to our Program Director, Einar Omas. I would now like to welcome Susan Coakley, who has served for the past year as our Vice President. Her steadiness and thoughtfulness has really been appreciated and with an incredibly well done job. Thank you, Susan. Susan.
Oh, thank you for those kind words, Pam. And good evening, everyone. It's so great to be together. It's a little different from last year, and it'll be different next year again, I'm sure, but this is a wonderful milestone to celebrate. And I'm delighted to announce our new board members and our new slate of officers. So I will begin now with Caitlin Clark, Gabriella Coletta, excuse me, Marcella, oh, excuse me a minute, please. I lost my place here on the slide. Could you go back to the last slide, Pam, please? Thank you. Marcella Lancombe, Gretchen Manning, and Linnea Walsh. And our new officers include Dawn Shan, Dolores Pettis as Vice President, Amy Diamond as Treasurer, and Celia Clancy as Secretary. And I didn't note, but as you can read on the slide, Dawn is our incoming president, and we really welcome her and look forward to working with her. That's right. Do you need me to ask for a vote on that, Pam?
Yes, just one point before you ask for a vote, and that is to ask if any current members would like to run for office before you call for a vote on what we'll call the slate of officers.
Okay, thank you. Sorry if this is a little bit clunky then. So yes, I'm making that call to action to the existing board members to inquire if anybody would like to run for any office. Hearing none, I would like a motion to elect this slate of officers.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
The motion passes. Pam, do you also need a motion on the new board members?
Yes, both our board and the new board members for the PAC, please. Yes.
Okay, great. So the list is here in front of everybody. I will not read all of these names. I'll give folks a minute to peruse it. And then I'm going to ask for a motion to elect this board of directors for the MWPC board and for the PAC board, as well as the regional committee chairs.
So moved.
And could I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, John. The motion passes. And congratulations to the new directors and officers and committee chairs. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Susan. 2020 was definitely a hectic year all around, including at the MWPC PAC. We were proud to stand behind a talented and diverse set of candidates who overcame extreme challenges to run for office this year. 86% of our candidates won their general elections. 25% of our candidates were women of color, and 6 openly identify as members of the LGBTQ community. There were quite a few changes to our endorsement process this past year. We transitioned to a completely virtual interview process, which was really very different than interviewing in person. We updated all our application and interview materials so that it would be virtual. We produced an online toolkit for our endorsed candidates. We hosted a virtual 2-part fundraiser in October called From Protest to Power. This innovative event brought in 7 speakers over 2 nights to address how to turn protests and issue-based advocacy into productive legislation. We exceeded our fundraising goal. And just as a note, money from the PAC goes directly towards supporting candidates. Lastly, I would like to thank our amazing group of PAC board members and PAC interns who handled our virtual transition and our new changes flawlessly. We could not have done any of this without them and without my amazing co-chair, Caitlin Clark. Caitlin?
Thank you so much, Amy. And I'll just say it's been a pleasure serving with you. Amy knows we chat on the phone every day, basically. It was definitely an interesting year for the PAC, but I'm so proud of the work that we've done. But of course, going into 2020, we have new leadership. So I'm super, super thrilled for us to be welcoming Sam Kelly as the role of the PAC chair. So Sam is currently our PAC treasurer. I first met her a couple years ago when I was doing work with the MWPC and the young professionals, and just the energy and the innovation and the grace and the charm that Sam brings, I think is going to be crucial to the chair to kind of coming in. So Sam is currently our treasurer. She knows the PAC operations very well. In her professional life, she's currently a consultant at Public Consulting Group. Prior to that, she worked for State Senator Eric Lesser. So Sam is bringing a lot of really great political experience as well as leadership to the PAC board. I'm super excited to have Sam join us and so thrilled to see what she's going to do with the PAC in the coming years. So with that, I'll welcome our new PAC chair for 2021, Samantha Kelly.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Caitlin. Caitlin and Amy have really done an incredible job shepherding and streamlining the endorsement process over these past 2 years. And I've learned so much from them as a fellow board member. And in these political turbulent times, it is really the work we do in this organization and on this board in particular that really keeps me hopeful. Meeting women running for office is so inspiring, knowing that they're on their way to transform our governments, to look more like our electorate. And it's our greatest hope that we can play even a small role in that victory. And I'm just so honored to step into this role, to continue and expand upon the work we do and serve alongside truly accomplished women on the PAC board of directors. We can't do any of this without them, without their leadership. And I'm thrilled to take on 2021, whatever it brings, with this group. And in particular, I want to highlight our 3 newest board members, Nikita Burns, Ava Calendar Concepcion, and Cabell Eames. Welcome to the board, ladies. I look forward to working with each of you and meeting this year's fantastic candidates. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dawn.
Thank you. I want to thank all my friends on the board. MWPC turns 50 this year. This organization has a proud history and a relevant future. And I want to thank you for entrusting me with the opportunity to lead it. So here we are on the eve of the inauguration. Tomorrow, Kamala Harris becomes the first woman ever to serve as vice president, in no small part because our keynote speaker, LaTosha Brown, called for this appointment. In the Senate, Georgia's election tipped the balance of power, in large part due to the work of Black Voters Matter, which she founded. I am honored to introduce one of the nation's most effective political organizers. LaTosha Brown is a 2021 Hauser Leader at Harvard Kennedy School, founder of Southern Black Girls and Women's Consortium, a $100 million 10-year initiative to invest in organizations that serve Black women and girls. And she co-founded Black Voters Matter, which works to boost Black voter registration and turnout, as well as increase power in marginalized, predominantly Black communities. She is an accomplished performing artist and a graduate of Selma High School, part of the first generation to integrate the public schools. We have known each other since 9th grade. LaTosha, thank you so much for joining MWPC tonight.
Thank you, Dawn, for having me. I am really, really honored to be here. And so, yes, you are my high school classmate. We have known each other, and it's really interesting that both of us come from what is like the cradle of the Black belt that that literally was the foundation for voting rights in this country. And so both of us, since that time in Selma, we've both continued, to really be able to, how do we build on this rich legacy of voting rights in Selma, but also how do we expand opportunity and access to both women and people of color. And so I'm super, super honored to be in this space. And I'm extremely excited when they were calling the officers, and I know you told me, I was aware that you had won this office, but to actually hear it, and all of the work that this organization has done over the last year warms my heart. I'm completely, I just want to say congratulations. I like your leadership you've always been a leader. I've never known you be in any other space, but be a leader and have such a brilliant mind and just warm heart. So congratulations to you.
Natasha, I can't cry on my first day. We've known each other a long time, and I've really had the pleasure of watching your organization evolve. And Natasha, I don't think there's anything like it in America. It combines old-fashioned voter engagement and 21st century data-driven campaigning, community service and evangelization, artistic expression, and just pure joy. So I want to start our conversation by just asking, why did you start Black Voters Matter?
I want to thank you for that question. I want to, since we are on the eve of, is he gone yet? Like, since we are on that eve, I want to share kind of thinking about it, but I also want to share about what moment we're in. And, we can look at this kind of Trump administration and Trump coming into power as, what happened? Like, everybody's like, well, what happened? I could see it a miles away. I literally remember when he was running and I told folks he was going to win. I specifically remember seeing a conversation where Obama was saying, y'all, Trump is not going to win. Like, he was just so adamant about it, because I think there's some nuanced things that I recognize that actually work for Trump, but they will also work for us. And so let me say what I mean by that. Not having integrity, not lying. Those are not the things I'm talking about. But I'm raising this because of a particular way. Politics in this country has been so stale. It's been very stale. It's been very, very exclusive. It's been very, if you're not outside of being a political wonk, who cares about politics, right? Those of us that this is what we eat, sleep, and breathe, we're thinking like, well, isn't that everybody should care about policy? No, they don't. Like, everybody cares about how they're going to feed their families, how they're going to live their lives. This is not their sweet spot. Like, everybody's not thinking about surgery, but like a doctor would be, or, and so I'm raising this because I think that one of the things that I want to kind of share and lift up in terms of what we did that was very similar, with very different intentions, that in the process of what I do think that Trump did very well is, unfortunately, he popularized racism. He mainstreamed a political context that normally has been left up to, quote, the elite, right? I'm raising that because for us, part of the intersection of where we sit, it is not in, if this is the conversation, I can't come on the call on this discussion and give the conversation around, this is the best way to do GOTV. There's so many people that know how to do GOTV. That's like a given, right? Look, canvassing and how do you create a canvas plan, a GOTV plan, that's been around for 100 years and it works, right? But it works up to a point. The challenge is there's one thing that you actually have this skill set and the dynamics, which I think can be taught around how do you build an organization and the organizational structure to move people to vote. But the one thing is, how do you inspire and motivate people to actually feel a sense of their agency and their power? That is distinctively different. And that is not a skill set that I think that has been in the process. Part of what, and I promise you this won't be about him, but I want to make a point that part of what Trump was able to do is Trump was able to ignite something that was dormant in folks, be it right or wrong, or whether we agree with it or not. He was able, folks who for whatever reason, did not feel compelled that the political landscape was speaking to them, he found ways to use their language, even though it was exploitive, even though it was mean spirit, to do that. And so what I believe that we have to really be able to have a context of the way we look at politics is we have to capture those hearts, minds, and spirits of the electorate, so that literally it's not just based in this frame of, oh, let's say democracy for democracy's sake. Who cares about that, right? Other than those of us who are passionate about that, but literally helping people to really feel a sense of their own power. And so we created the organization in 2016, myself along with Cliff Albright, the co-founder, with the explicit purpose to say there are political parties and political candidates. The only time you hear about elections or about politics and why you need to vote is it's either driven by a party or a candidate, and is usually in this very limited way. What if we created a framework that we were actually at the intersection of doing the data-driven skill set, retail politics? We also added the cultural dynamic to help people shift the way they see themselves in power and their relationship to power. What if we shifted the dynamics of how we use culture as a tool to give messages? What if we use pop culture and popular education tools to really be able to ignite and engage people who normally may not engage in this process? And so in that's how we founded the organization. And so we created many organizations. We have a super PAC. We wanted to make sure that a lot of times you try to be an end all and be all fact of people, you can't, right? But what we wanted to do is we created Black Voters Matter Fund, which was a C4, that we would explicitly literally be able to work strongly on elections, be able not to have the same limitations of C4, where we could support candidates, do independent IEs. Then we created the C3. Our C3, we could work directly just capacity building. All we would do is do capacity building on groups that were on the ground. And then we have a super PAC. And the super PAC, what I call is that's where we go hard in the paint. But what it did is it provided some covering from the groups on the ground that Black groups are traditionally, when they go political, they'll get attacked. And so we had the capacity and the resources and the legal team that could provide a different level of covering for us. And so in our super PAC, that we could actually have hard hitting campaigns that would actually help support the work on the ground, but provide some covering. So I'm raising that because I want that for us, it wasn't about, let me say this, and this is gonna sound, we have to move beyond the conversation of winning. Let me say it again. We have to move beyond the conversation of winning. Because if your conversation is only win or lose, you will only win or lose. This has to be a conversation that goes beyond the transactional fact of winning and is about transformation. And so when women are running for office, regardless of the part of what I remember going, I went to Yale's women's political school, campaign school years ago. And I remember this was years ago, and other campaign trainings I would go to. I remember going to some campaign trainings and spending a whole lot of time on electability. And I was spending a whole lot of time on, what was possible for women candidates to make. And it wasn't that information wasn't true, but it wasn't the total truth. That on some level, anytime you are trying to expand territory, you have to be pioneering. And so part of what I think in this process, I'm saying this, is that if we're only directing women to go after those seats that we think that women can win, we will never change the political landscape. I believe that in every single office that is open in Massachusetts, just on GP, you all should have a woman run. I mean, literally. Part of what that will do is that's part of the transformation process of actually helping people to get used to seeing women run for office, helping people to get used to seeing the political landscape shift. And so we also have to expand where we're not just seeing win as a traditional, you're winning the seat. We have to see win as how do we advance the field that opens access for women to really be able to tap in and gain power, as well as we want some of those seats too. Now we want the power too, we want the seats as well. But I think part of it is predicates the other happening. And so for our work with Black Voters Matter, and I know I probably gave you way more than I probably went off. I'm not sure if I answered the question or not, but I think part of what is really important is for us to really realize, and I'm convinced on this, I may be wrong, but I am convinced on this, that if anybody will change the political landscape in this country, it will be women. And I am not, and I have history and receipts to show me that, right? That there are even ways that we have a flexibility to move around in ways in terms of how we engage with our ego, how we, at the end of the day, when you got another human being, like you have another human being that you're solely responsible to, it will humble you up real quick, right? When you got a little person that's taken over your body for a whole year almost, like it has a certain kind of way of grounding us that I think that men are not, men don't respond the same way. My point being, part of even women's orientation in this process is to how can we compete with a male by creating a male-centered campaign. And male-centered, not necessarily I'm saying as a candidate, but that we take on the same components. What we showed and demonstrated in Georgia, we did the exact opposite of what folks say you're supposed to do. Instead of spending money on television ads as a political consultant, we bought all the collard greens in the state of Georgia. It worked. Collard greens work, right? Right, because we know that food and some of those, so there are ways that we will, I'll just stop by saying this. There are ways that we use and tap into innovation of really being intuitive on how do you take care of community that allow our message to be received and accepted in a different kind of way, because people didn't think that we were just showing up to get a vote. People felt in relationship with us and they felt in community. And so I do think that there's an opportunity for you all to do that in Massachusetts as well, that literally, but I think women cannot be afraid to do what we do well, and lean into that, even if that means initially it feels like it feels like it's counterintuitive to the traditional political process, that if we lean into the differences and really see a win beyond winning the seat, that ultimately we will be able to take on more power. We'll be able to take on and put more women in political office.
I am so glad you talked about a willingness to fail. You know, every campaign cannot be about like the final vote count. It also has to be about your ideas, your galvanizing of your community. And, you know, I think we just lose sight of that so often. You know, Massachusetts is a curious state. You know, change is happening very slowly here. You know, I keep hearing people say like, let's Georgia Boston. You know, in Massachusetts, women hold like, I know, you've turned a state into a verb, Latasha. But women hold like 31% of the seats at the state house, you know, at the municipal level, and we're talking mayors, councils, select boards. Those numbers are 21 to 26%. Many of our communities with large minority populations have almost no representation at the local level. So I think what a lot of people want to know is what did Black Voters Matter do in Georgia that we can replicate in Massachusetts?
So there's a couple of stories. I had a couple of themes I wanted to share, and I'll, so there's a couple of lessons. So if I were to say like 5 lessons, Latasha Brown, 5 lessons. The first one is culture will eat strategy for breakfast. Right, that at the end of the day, that you can literally, what happened in Georgia was extraordinary. I'm not saying that just because I was a part of that process, but to let you know how extraordinary that was, is that the whole runoff system was created specifically to actually for Black voters to be at a disadvantage. I mean, it's in the creator of it said this was specifically to bust up, quote, the Negro voting bloc. So you got that on the background of there were 200,000 voters who were dropped from the voting rolls 6 months before the primary. This is after the Stacey Abrams race. This is 6 months before the primary last year. 200,000 people were dropped from the voting rolls. Disproportionately, guess who they were? African Americans. So you had that. In addition to that, if y'all watched the primary, our primary that happened in the spring, in the late spring, was an absolute utter disaster. We actually stood in line with people. There were some Black voters that actually did not vote. The last voter at one of the sites that we worked in did not vote until 12:37 a.m. on Wednesday. Like, that is how atrocious it was. In addition to that, you have a tremendous amount of polling sites that have been closed over the last years, particularly with the shift of the Voting Rights Act, and then just ongoing voter suppression efforts. So it wasn't that everything was an even playing field and then Black folks came out and we were able to win. While all of those things continue to manifest and continue to go, we continue to be targeted. There were commercials that literally were targeting at Black men to not vote. There were commercials and this message that in some way Black women were taking over and we needed to, and Black men needed to stand with Trump. In spite of all of that, what we saw is record numbers of Black voters come out. Part of it is those lessons. I'll say kind of 5 lessons. I think one is culture will eat strategy for breakfast. What do I mean? Is that when you know people, use what you know. Like, let's know what we know. When we know our community, Massachusetts has a specific kind of culture that is very it's very homogeneous to Massachusetts. I remember, Don, when I was a resident fellow at Harvard, I was staying in Boston. What was interesting, like the whole culture of apple picking and apple cider, like I can't wait to get back to. I can't wait to get back. Hopefully I'll be back this fall, but I can't wait to get back. That is not part of Georgia culture, right? But I would talk to people and everybody would talk to me like, you haven't had apple cider donuts? I was like, no, obviously, I had never heard of apple cider donuts before I was at Harvard. I'm raising that because that, as simple and as small as that is a part that is literally, that is kind of a part of the local culture. And when you're able to really be able to use the local culture to rally people around for conversation, for engagement, it has a different kind of way that people respond. It's not when you're just saying, we're just going to do let's have a political discussion. Who comes to political discussions? People who care about politics. But that's not who we're actually trying to expand the electorate. So we also have to find other ways to engage people, and the ways that you engage people who are on kind of the margins or who don't center politics is like you lean into the culture. So I think that's one. The second thing is we had to shift the paradigm of power. That the way that power was seen is that people saw power outside of themselves. They would say, well, I'm not going to vote because I don't think that my vote makes a difference. Instead of us trying to convince them that the system, and they were like, well, I don't believe in the system. We would actually say, well, you know what? I felt the same way myself. There's some times I voted, I really didn't think that my vote counted, right? Tell us what it is that you care about. And we shift the paradigm to center them in what it is that they care about. And once you kind of engage in that conversation, then we would kind of backdoor it in to help them understand how that was specifically connected to an issue, whatever it was that they cared about. And so in order to do that, you have to shift the paradigm of power. We can't keep framing like there's some power out here and y'all, we got to participate so we can get a part of that power. We have to frame it. We have to shift it. This is where the power is, right? We've just forgotten. Let's operate in our power. And guess what? They're going to move the way we need. They work for us. And so that's a different kind of orientation, I think, in terms of actually in centering power. What if women had a conversation about power, right? How women see power. How is it that we see power, right? You know, there are ways that I remember, I remember in my family is, I'm from Alabama, so I'm deeply deep South, right? I'm red dirt deep South. And so my family comes out of a long history of Christian tradition. And literally they would always say this phrase around when I'm growing up, you know, the man is the head of the household. The man is the head of the household. Like none of the women in my family, if you call them a feminist, would say they were feminist. Like none of them. Like, why would you be a feminist? None of them would say that, right? But there's not a single man in my family that ran the house. Not one. I would be in amazement. I was like, he has not made a single decision. Like with my grandmother, my aunt, my mother, none of them, right? So I'm raising that because there is a particular kind of power that women have that we can detach to. If you need the title for the ego, fine, right? But the real power in my family, I don't even know why they call them head of household. I really don't. But I was like, well, I guess it made them feel good or something. But every decision I've ever seen made, if she says no, it ain't happening, right? And so part of what I'm raising that, I think that there's a particular kind of way that we maneuver and navigate as women that we should lean into, even in this political space, of how we can detach ourselves from this individual ego and literally use those tools that we know that can actually bring people to the table, to the party. The third thing is, I think we have to have a new narrative, that we've got to start writing ourselves into the narrative. So instead of having a narrative that says women are left out, we need to shift and say women are here. Like, matter of fact, my phrase would be, women are the future. Every time somebody hears me talk, like, women are the future. Like, what? Like, women are the future. Like, women are here and women are the future. And I've got all kinds of meanings of what I mean by that, right? And so I think there's some way that we have to kind of own that this is this space, and that the world just needs us, doesn't it? So instead of us operating as if we are trying to get in the house that the men built, which really we built, but that the men built or are dominating, we have to shift the narrative to say, okay, guys, we see y'all just can't do this. So what we're gonna do, like, the world needs us. Y'all need us really bad. So the world needs women. And the leadership and the voice and the nurturing space of women. And then the last two things that I'll say is, I think feeding off that is we should lead with story. That it does make a difference when we are to say that I am running for office and I am a mother of 5 children. I've raised 5 children. I took care of my partner. I did whatever. That doesn't take away from us. That's part of my superpower, right? To really be able to do those things. And so I think there's something about a story that resonates with, I think, women in particular. And I think we don't run away from that. Or I might be the woman that, like, I didn't want children. That's not what I wanted. I just wanted to be such and such. That's your story. Tell your story. Don't let them continue to put us in these boxes, because I think the more stories of the diversity and the expanded thinking of women, that it literally creates grace and space for that. And then the last thing I'll say is that gender is not enough. That, they're just saying, well, I'm a woman, what does that mean? Right? Or leaning into gender representation. While I am the first to say that I believe in representation, right? I can tell you from the Supreme Court that even for me, race is not enough, because Justice Thomas does not represent me at all. But we also get caught up in, if we're going to be women and we're going to lead and take on the same values of men, what's the point? And so the last point around that is, I am hoping that we are courageous enough not to do all of this work so we can have a seat at the men's table, but that we're literally creating a whole different paradigm of what leadership will look like in the country and in the world. And instead of us moving away from this idea of leading with our heart, that we literally stand in that we lead from our humanity and our heart, and we're not embarrassed about that. We're not ashamed. We lead with compassion. And if anytime the world needed leadership that literally leaned into compassion, it would be now.
I want to come back to this idea of women in power, and like, why are people afraid to say we want power? And what happens if, even as an organization, we say we want power? Do you think women are afraid to do that?
Absolutely. I think most people who have been locked out of the process, because I think on some level we have considered, every day we've got to do work around, I think there should be conversations, even in this space. I think you all need to have a conversation about what is power, right? Because we have all made this assumption of what power is. And part of that has been informed by how power has been used against us, sometimes to help us, for whatever reasons, right? And so, for example, we literally go around and say that America is the most powerful country in the world. Why is it we say America is the most powerful country in the world? Part of it is because America is the only country on the earth, on the planet, that actually had weaponry that could actually disintegrate human flesh in thin air. Mm-hmm. So we attached power to destruction. We actually talk about being the most powerful in the world because we have the most powerful military. And that is based on, we have the greatest ability to kill the most people in the quickest amount of time. Let's be honest, whether we want to say that or not. What else is it based on? It is based on our military might. It's based on how we actually have the ability to obliterate people with a touch of a button, right? I mean, wasn't that the whole thing of the Cold War? My point is, we also have to really recognize how we have a distorted understanding of what power is. And so we've got to really be able to shift that paradigm around power. And so we should have conversations about what power looks like, because it looks like in very, very different ways. And so that even for us, and so I think part of what happens is that we see power as domineering. To have power, you have to be in a position to dominate. To be in power, you have to literally be in a position of where you can control and force others to do what you want them to do. To be in power, you have to be at the top. There's a particular paradigm that we're all been trained in, that we believe like power meant, our concept of power has been shaped by male dominance. And we have to be honest about that. So now we've got to reconstruct, right, what our thinking, knowing that the reality is yes, this is the world that we live in, right? But knowing that there is an opportunity, I think, for us to reframe what this approach to power is, and to help our communities have a different orientation of power, right? Can peace be power? I don't know if anybody would actually say peace is power. I mean, I know there's some people, but you get my point. My point is, we have to literally understand that part of the unraveling of this idea, this notion of power, right, we have to deal with it. Part of the reason why Margaret Thatcher, and I'm not saying this in any way to be demeaning, I'm saying it as a way of what is just factual. She was considered I've read pieces where she was as strong and as iron fist as a man, so that her power was attached to her ability to be heavy-handed, not necessarily anything else. And so I think it's really important in this moment, you know, after we've seen such an abuse of power, I think in many ways Trump is a gift. And this is what I noticed, that he opens up a new space, a paradigm for us to have a different conversation about power, and a different conversation about the abuse of power, and what is power, and why should women be fighting for power? Why should we generate that power and target it? And so I just think that in this moment, we all should be really reflective on some concepts that I think we've taken for granted, right? But they've been heavily influenced by male thinking.
Mm-hmm. There's a question in the Q&A about food. And I just want to give you a chance to tell a story about those collard greens, because as you mentioned, as you didn't know anything about apple cider donuts, most of the people on this call have never had collard greens on New Year's Day. But talk about like what you did in Georgia, because you had a collard green and black-eyed pea caucus, which I really wanted to go to.
Yes.
Your opposition was selling guns.
Our opposition was raffling a gun on that same day. And so I was like, you know, the collard greens beat out the guns on that day. But so there is a part of Southern culture, and it's very prevalent in Black Southern culture, is that on New Year's Day, it's a tradition that on New Year's Day, you have to have a pot of collard greens. It represents money and wealth and prosperity in your family, and black-eyed peas, which also represents prosperity and health. And so, of course, you have cornbread, because you got to wash all that down, right? Because who can have greens and no cornbread, right? So it's black-eyed and greens. Those are like a staple, a part of the tradition of what you have on election day. And so not on election day, I'm sorry, on New Year's Day. And so part of what culture does is culture affirms people. That's why when you go somewhere else, and if you go to another country, you don't speak the native language or tongue. When someone is saying, you hear someone speak English, you perk up. You're like, okay, it's okay, because you feel some sense of connectedness. If you go somewhere, if you got a favorite, something that you do in your community, and you go, for example, if we go to a Sichuan, China, and they've got apple cider donuts, we're like, you got apple cider donuts. Like, why are we excited? It's not like you can't get apple cider donuts, but in some ways, what you feel is that culture is almost like it affirms you, that like, okay, this is the thing that I do. And so what we did is that we knew that with our work, that talking about voting and voting people, there was like, you could not cut on the commercial, y'all. Like, I know election season in Massachusetts is one thing, but literally, if I didn't have Netflix, I would have gotten a subscription with Netflix because I could not cut on my TV and every single commercial was not a political commercial. At some point, I had to tune that out because it's just, it takes over my day. And most people do that. And so we had to find other creative ways to get messages and engage people in an authentic way. And so we had what we call our first annual Collard Green Caucus. And so with our Collard Green Caucus, what we did is we actually, it was actually kind of threefold. One, there was an economic piece around it too. Instead of putting millions of dollars, spending our money on television ads, we knew that COVID-19 has had a devastating impact on communities. And one of the communities that has been impacted, what we knew was in Southwest Georgia and the farmers. And so what we did is we found the Black Farmers Co-op and the farmers, and we were like, we want all the collard greens. And so we bought all of the collard greens in the state who are connected very deeply in those rural communities. So there was an economic benefit from that. We actually we created a whole distribution. We were in 50 counties. We did this particular thing in 30 counties and then had smaller operations to come out of that. So it literally had some economic value around it. In addition to that, we actually set up right across the street from voting sites. So you didn't have to vote to be able to come get it. But since you're there, why don't you go across the street and vote? Right. And so what we did is we created these all around the state. People were so excited. It was far more successful than even we expected it to be, because it didn't have a class issue on it. So it didn't matter whether you are whether you're poor or whether you are at the top of the food chain. The culture of cooking greens and black-eyed peas is something that is part of the tradition. And so what we saw is a whole different spectrum of people that would come. And what was interesting is as they would pull up, they would say, we're so proud of y'all. This is so wonderful. They felt affirmed. So they felt it wasn't like something you got to be afraid of. We were like, yeah, welcome to the Collard Green Caucus. Here's your collard greens, your black-eyed peas, and your cornbread mix. And here's information on how you can early vote. You can go right across the street right there. Matter of fact, we can take you across the street. You can park your car. We've got a food truck right here. You can go right across the street to vote. Or here's a list right now of the dates of early voting and early voting sites. And so, but we're really grateful. Thank you for coming out and thank you for celebrating. There was something celebratory around that because voting for some communities can actually be traumatic, right? It's not a really good experience to go stand in line for 5 hours, right? And so part of that's what we were able to do, centered around this notion that this is something that the community is part of the culture of the community. And we can literally be able to build and utilize that moment. And so that's what we did. We actually, even for between Thanksgiving and Christmas, we actually provided food for over 20,000 families. Part of it too, and it wasn't it wasn't in a way that said, if you do this, we're gonna do that. It was what we do realize is when you show up for communities in a way that they need you, right, that you become the messenger. Trump could have had all kind of commercials on the radio in those communities as he did. And do you think they're gonna they're gonna listen to him or they're gonna listen to us, right? So at the end of the day, part of it is building that trust, showing up in innovative ways that the community said they need you. Because at one point, and when we were in rural Georgia, they were talking about the numbers of requests of one of the churches partners we had for toys, that people didn't have toys. And so we did a big toy drive and and sold Santa to go around and spread joy and come in places. And it made a difference because we were showing up, one, responding to the needs of folks. So it wasn't gimmicky. We were literally providing a service to folks, right? But then two, being able to create this culture of community that is affirming. And then three, be able to give people legitimate information on how they could vote and even assist them. In many of those places, we had vans lined up. that if you showed up, you wanted to vote, we like you get chauffeured service if that's what you want, right? And so that it creates this process where it becomes seamless.
Tasha, I want to come back to something else you said, giving people the grace and space. I think when women run, we have a tendency to say, I want women in office, but not her. So, can you tell me a little bit about grace and space and what you would like for women's organizations to do for other women?
So there's a couple of things. One, I do think, and I think this in communities that have been marginalized, we have a way that we want the best first, right? And while that sounds noble, that actually comes out of oppression, right? And I have voted for so many mediocre men, white men in my life. Like I have, just think about it. Think about how many mediocre white men that we voted for, right? Or mediocre men, right? That we voted for in our lives. And we continue like, yeah, we know he's mediocre, but we just, all right. Like, it's just, okay, right? That's who we got right now. But we hold women at another standard. So what we do is we start replicating our oppression, that we know that oftentimes women and people of color, that in order just to be competitive with our white male counterparts, we have to have some advantage over them to say that we're worthy to be competing with them. And unfortunately, sometimes we internalize that and continue that same kind of strategy forward. Like, I'm okay with letting some women mess up. Women can mess up too, right? At the end of the day, I think it's really important for us to really be able to create the spectrum that, yes, of course, I'm in all circumstances, I'm going to want the best candidate. So in no way am I saying not that should not be a standard, but I also am saying the way in which we give grace and space to men, we give men a lot of room to mess up. We give men a lot of room to be mediocre, right? But if a woman comes, she has to be perfect. She has to be, she has to have the right kind of attitude. We've got to be, she has to prove herself to us. And so I think it's really important for us to realize that what we are doing is replicating the same kind of internalized oppression that has continued to keep men in position as long as they're being. The fact that there are more women in this country and we're talking about fighting for space, like, can't we think about how crazy that is? That is insane. Like, that is insane. If men were the vast majority of the country, and they had the numbers, this country wouldn't exist. They were like, something's wrong. We shut everything down, right? And so my point is, and it's not for us to approach it the same way that they approach it. It is for us to really re-examine how oppression lives in us. I love to share this story. I'll share this story real quick. I was a number of years ago, and I know some of you all will be able to identify with this. A number of years, I tell the story all the time. A number of years ago, I decided on New Year's that I was going to do my New Year's resolution. I was going to lose weight because I was going to be fine, because I was going to wear a 2-piece bikini by the summer. In order to do that, I need to lose 30 pounds, right? I was like, I'm going to be fine by the summer, so I've got to lose 30 pounds. And so I went on this diet. And bad idea, but nevertheless, and yes, I am one of those folks that believe in New Year's resolutions. I'm her. But anyway, so I went on this diet, and this diet that I was on, I only had one cheat day a week. And so this particular cheat day, I decided that I wanted Gladys Knight chicken and waffles. Gladys Knight, the singer, has this place in Atlanta. It's called Gladys Knight Chicken and Waffles. They're so good, but the waffles are probably 20,000 calories per waffle, and the chicken wings, I'm quite sure they're at least a million calories per chicken wing, right? That's why they're so good. And so this was my one cheat day. So the long story short, as I'm walking into the restaurant, there's a homeless man that is sitting on the side, and someone had given him, he was eating food. Someone had given him some food. He was eating food. I spoke, we kind of exchanged a couple of words, and I walked inside. Good, I walked inside, got my food. But mind you all, now I only have one cheat meal. So what do you do when you have a cheat meal? Like, you save some of it so you can eat later. I was so adamant about this cheat meal that at the time, my son was a teenager, and I called him Eat 'em Up. So he would eat everything in the refrigerator. So I had already mapped out in my head how I was going to be on the offensive and hide my food in the refrigerator so my son wouldn't eat it up. And so I get my food, and as I'm walking out, the homeless man who was sitting on the side, who I'd seen eat food when I was going in, he said, ma'am, can I have your food? Now, of course, I could have said no, but I am and Don knows, we are deep Southern polite women. And if somebody asks you for your food in the South, in my household, I got to give you my food. The one thing that I am compelled is if you ask me for food, I have to give you food, right? And so here I am in this dilemma. I want my food, but I got to give it to him because he asked for it, because that's my upbringing. So as I'm begrudgingly giving him my food, I'm giving him my food, and I was like, you probably eat better than I do. And he says to me, what do you think, I shouldn't? And it messed me up. I like that night, I just gave it to him. I went on that night. I couldn't sleep. The next day I was bothered. I couldn't sit with it. And I couldn't sit with it because it was true. Here I am, Miss Latasha Brown, social justice activist. Here I am, Miss, we've got to support the poor. Right, here I am, all of this work that I've done for homeless shelters, for homeless, and literally to be able to lift up the support that's needed for homeless families. I did not, until that moment where he checked me, did not realize how oppression lived in me. The truth of the matter is, I did believe, because I worked every day, that I should eat better than him. I said it. I said, you probably eat better than me. And the truth of the matter is, why shouldn't he? Because I had some preconceived notion that because I am who I am, and because I worked or whatever I had, right, that I should eat better than he should eat. And so even though if you ask me one-on-one that, I'm political enough to know not to say, oh my God, no, I would never say that, right? But it was in that moment, in the heat of me being honest, that I literally shared, I'm saying that because there's not a single person on this call that oppression does not live in you somewhere, right? And that oppression just doesn't apply for outside of yourselves. As women, we have been literally trained, baked in a process that says that women are secondary to men. And it lives in us in many ways, oftentimes in ways that we're not even conscious of. And so I think it's really important, I'm raising that part of the work that we have to do is you have to do your work. That we have to do our work first. Where does oppression, where does racism live in you? There's no way that we grew up in America and there's not some values around racism that does not live in us. I don't care how liberal we think of ourselves. It's there. The goal is to literally not be afraid to examine yourselves, not in a space around guilt or feeling bad or shame, but as a way that literally you can transform yourself, because ultimately I want to be the best version of myself. My goal is to be the highest expression of God on this earth. Now that's my belief system, right? But that's literally when I'm talking about the women who are, regardless of what your belief system is, we should all want to tap into our highest and our best selves. And anytime oppression is there and we're not dealing with the oppression, or anytime we have the audacity to think that we don't have any oppression, that right there points to something. So I am hoping that, Don, even in this process, as we're doing this work, that we don't see the change on how we're going to change those things on the outside, but that we realize that the real change is going to be in the inside out. Part of, if we want the world to address and create more space for women, guess what? That means we've got to demonstrate that we've got to create more space in our own personal belief systems around women and providing grace and space.
Tasha, I didn't know where we were going with this conversation. I'm so surprised by this call to vulnerability, this call to like honest confession. I feel like, part of me feels like we're back in church.
I curse too much to be in church.
I do want to take us back just a little bit to the nuts and bolts of campaigns and politics, though, just quickly. Everyone's so excited about Georgia, the Senate races in Alabama in 2017. I think you're best known for that. But at the same time, I know how proud you are of some of the small races that nobody talks about. Like you've taken all the things you've talked about, culture, grace and space, honesty, to municipal races. Some of the tiniest towns in the South, you've gotten people elected. And I was wondering if you would talk to us a little bit about the importance of those races to you.
So I think there's a, I'll be really brief on this. I think that it's really important for us to really think that strategy does matter. While culture will eat strategy for breakfast, that doesn't mean you don't eat strategy. Strategy matters. And so we are, what we say in our, we're not data driven, we're data informed. And so be very clear. We know, we count the votes up. We know what votes we need. We know how many votes we need to turn out. We're very methodical around that. And then we add the other pieces. Part of what we saw as a strategy, and if you all were looking at election night in Georgia, I don't know if you recall some of what you heard, but part of what you would hear is they would say, well, here it is in Southwest Georgia, that's a Republican country, a Republican county, and the Republicans are going to win it, but there's a Black voting group. I mean, there's a Black voters in that area that came out in high numbers. I'm raising this because I think part of our strategy was that in those counties, what we had seen is that the Democratic Party in many ways had advocated, or at least that was our experience over years. Those are not Democratic counties, so we're not going to invest in those. Ours was the difference. We were like part of what takes the edge, and that's what happened this time. That yes, the Democratic center of the state is Metro Atlanta. Right? But you still got to deal with all of those rural areas. And part of the ways that you can offset that, you may not win a county, but you can offset some of those votes, the sting of those votes in those rural areas, if you pull up the Democratic vote in those rural areas, because it's cumulative, right? And so part of our strategy was a couple of things. One, that we know, we learned this in Poli Sci 101 and we never follow it, but all politics are local. And so it's hard to get people to be excited about a Senate race when they've lost control of their school board. It's hard to get excited about a presidential race, which is so far removed when they've lost control of the county commission. And so all of those counties that we were working in, they didn't just see us in presidential election. We actually have been working over the last few years on city council races that most folks don't fund city council races. Who funds a city council race other than a candidate, right? City council races, sheriff races, DA races, right? And it wouldn't be every race. It would be the races that those local communities said that they care about. And we would create synergy and energy and build out the ecosystem and infrastructure around that. And so when we got time, when it got time for us to talk about these larger races, we already got an existing infrastructure that is in place that we can activate and then build out. And so that was part of our strategy. The second part of the strategy is literally allowing people to coalesce around the local issues, that they're not the same. I mean, as you know, and East Mass and West Mass are totally different, right? You know, there's Boston and the rest of Massachusetts, right? It's completely different, right? And I'm raising that because I think it's really important that we know the nuances around where we're building. But what happens is if you're building these nodes of power, you can literally be able to build out an ecosystem. So think of it in terms of building out an ecosystem instead of just building this one unified force and everybody has to go this way and the message. The other thing that I'll raise is that it was really important for us to tap into the power of Indigenous leadership and homogeneous leadership. And so oftentimes we would engage in races. We've supported a couple of candidates that we knew weren't going to win. Now, strategically, that don't sound like whatever, right? Because the win for us was, we know that this person right here is going to work. Whether they win this race or not, they're going to work. They've got a tremendous amount of credibility in the community. Right now, maybe the community don't see them as city council person for whatever reason, but they got a whole lot of street cred. They got a whole lot of influence, and they're going to continue to do the work. And so because they're running, we're going to get behind their campaign to gauge folks, even though this particular race, they may not win. And so I think you all also have to be bold enough to make some strategic choices. Remember what I said earlier about expand how you see a win? That you see a win, not necessarily just the capturing of the seat, but how can you shift the paradigm in a community? How can you literally build out your infrastructure and your base in a community? And so sometimes you have to get behind candidates that you know will actually help in that effort, will help advance your efforts in that way.
I want to make sure, do you have a hard stop, Latasha?
I do have a hard stop at 7:15 because
okay.
I have
Okay, why don't we just give you one more question? I'm just looking through the questions they answered. Let's see. I I think what I would like to end with is the sense of the role of Black female leaders in the nation right now. And LaTosha, I've just been thinking a lot about Selma and growing up in Selma with you. And I've been thinking about Amelia Boynton. And she ran for Congress and was completely ignored. And I've been thinking about your own story. Your state race was stolen from you, like literally, figuratively stolen from you. We see Black women as these fierce and effective advocates for our nation's democracy until they get to the campaign trail. And I was wondering if you could talk to that contradiction in American life right now. What the difference between like having Stacey Abrams as your figurative leader, fighting for a democracy, but not being able to elect her.
That's right. So one, let me say she will become Governor Abrams. I am assured of that. At one point, we're gonna make that happen, right? We just had to get that man. Is he gone yet? But out of office. But I think that's part of her strategy, and I think that's part of. Let me say this, and I'm gonna say this as honest and open as I can. I'm standing before you now, or speaking to you now, as a Black woman from the Deep South, who my great grandmother was purchased 30 minutes from the childhood home that I grew up in Mobile, the first part of my life. And so I am from a people who were considered less than an animal. I am with a people who you can't get no deeper south than where I'm from. Like I'm from the dirt, the deep south, right? Yet here I am currently, and I'm saying this in a whatever, here I stand currently helping to shape the political landscape in this country. I have currently 4 or 5 fellowships at Harvard. I've got 2 major organizations with multi-million-dollar budgets, several organizations that I founded. That is not a testament, y'all, of how bad LaTosha Brown is. Certainly, I think that is a part of it, but there's never been a single thing that I have ever done that I did not have a cadre of Black women telling me that I could do it. Never. And so I'm raising all of those things that I'm standing in this space because I think Black women sit uniquely at the intersection of what I call the 2 evils in America, which is sexism and racism. And who else was it for us to depend on? Where else could we go? So at some point, I talked about this in a New York Times interview, but at some point pressure will either crush you or it will transform you. And so I think in many ways, Black women have not had the luxury of being the kept women, not because of that in any way do I equalize the experience of Black men and white men, because they're not equal. They have not been equal, right? However, I also think that Black women were created a particular kind of sisterhood so that when you see one Black woman, I can assure you there are 10 women behind her. I can assure you. So there's a particular kind of way that I think we have been forced, and I don't know if force is the word, that doesn't feel right now. There's a particular kind of approach that we have developed out of our experience of how we use our collective power to really be able to lift each other. And so I think that can work for anybody in some ways. And so I think that there is a particular, there's a particular way that I think that the history of how people connect with their family unit. Yes, listen, I love the men folk. I really love the men folk, right? I'm one of those women that love the men folk, right? But I can assure you that as much as I love the men folk, and love having them in my life and love having them as partners, that there is I would not survive outside if it had not been for the sisterhood. And so if there's one thing that I can lift up in the legacy of Black women is that the part of the way that we move like a pack. We don't move just as an individual, I'm an individual, or we don't move in the context of it's about me and my husband and my 2 children. That ain't how we move, right? It's me, my husband, my 2 children. It might be the child down the street that called me auntie that I'm not related to him, but I'm auntie because his mom was my best friend. It may be the other, there's a way we move as a pack. Right. And so that has worked. That has been our protection mechanism. That has been our power. That has been when we stood with white women and they did not stand with us in the women's suffrage movement. It was sisters that continued to keep us moving forward. When we didn't have the right to vote out of everybody till 55 years ago, there's not been a single group that we have not stood with. Yet, even in the story of Amelia Boynton, you see Dr. King and others, but it was 10 years earlier where she was doing the work and she called the meeting. So, but part of it is the way that Black women have approached our belief that some way it is a collective effort. I literally do not know any Black women. I mean, if I hear a Black woman and she says she doesn't get along with women, she's automatically suspect to me. I'm being honest, right? And so there's something about we've not had the world telling us we're pretty. We've had the world to tell us our skin was too dark, our nose was too big, we talk too much, we too aggressive. The whole world has told us that over and over and over again. But it's that sister that when you walking down the street, they say, girl, I like them shoes you got on. Or you know what, that's a nice lipstick. But oh, girl, what you doing with that hair? Our compliments have usually come from women. Like literally when we're saying that I'm gonna run for office, the men like, I don't know, you might not be ready. It's that woman in the background like, girl, you can do it. I keep them babies. Come on, bring the baby over here. I got you, right? My point is there's a certain kind of way that Black women have approached this notion of sisterhood that has been our survival mechanism. It has also been the mechanism of which we've excelled. And so all the work that I have done has come from the sisters in my household that were domestic workers who saved money so that I could go to school. The sisters in my household who literally would cuss like a sailor and feed the preacher on Sunday and be the main deaconess, whatever. The sisters in my household that literally said, you can't do anything unless, yes, he the head of the household, but listen, but I'm sitting there watching them in action run things, right? And so to me, there's a particular kind of way that our very survival created a space for us to affirm each other. And it has been the most powerful affirming thing in my entire life. Black women told me I was pretty when nobody else did. Black women told me I was smart when nobody else did. And so that's been my experience. And so it's worked for me. It's been my protection mechanism. If a war breaks out, I'm going to find a sister. I want the men too, but I'm going to find a woman.
I know we're coming up on your hard deadline. Thank you for bringing Selma to Massachusetts tonight. It's been great. I want to bring my friend Dolores and our fellow Southerner, by the way, just to say just a few closing remarks, but we are so grateful, Natasha.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you, ladies. Dolores, I think you're on mute.
Yeah. There you go, Dolores.
Thank you. All I can say is I'm exhilarated and ready to go to work. So sorry, everyone. We have come to the end of our time together. So I want to thank you again to our guest speaker, Latasha Brown. Awesome. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Great questions, great participation. And we've been left with a powerful message, one around transformation, one around power and power of women and the paradigm of leadership. So if there's anything that continues to be clear, is that your participation in affecting change matters. So we have seen the power of women, our voice, our convictions, our actions, and our vote. So after this talk tonight, there's no way you can be on the sidelines. So as the theme of our annual meeting says, MWPC is planning a breakthrough year in the continued advancement of women in political office. So if you aren't already involved, I encourage you to become involved. The link to our office is in the chat, and you've already got this in your email. So please take the moment to become involved. We will be in touch, so stay tuned. The recording will be posted on the website. Good night, everyone, and thank you.